We're going to get started now. Welcome. My name is Jean Cook. I'm a musician, and I'm the executive director of Future of Music Coalition. We're thrilled to see so many of our friends here at Gaston Hall. And FMC is happy to be returning to Georgetown University for what is turning out to be our best policy summit yet. Yesterday's musicians seminar, the screening of Copyright Criminals, and even the FOD dinner ended up being standing room only. We'd like to thank you for your flexibility, especially for those of you who ended up going around the corner from Nam Viet. I understand the Chinese food was actually quite good. We want to acknowledge our generous sponsors, without whom this conference is not possible. Many of them chose to underwrite scholarships for over 100 musicians to attend the conference. This is an important FMC tradition. It's actually one that introduced me to FMC in 2003 when I attended the summit here at Gaston Hall. You'll be hearing more from me later in the day. My purpose right now is simply to say hello, welcome, and to thank and to introduce our generous partner and host of the 8th Annual Policy Summit, Georgetown University's Department of the Performing Arts. Here's Anna Chalenza.
Thanks so much. I met many of you yesterday for what was really an exciting day. I could tell not only for all of you, but also for our students. So welcome to campus. Make yourself at home. Feel free to mingle with the students. Just don't get in trouble, and we're really glad you're here. Thanks so much.
Good morning. I'm Michael Bracey. I'm one of the co-founders of Future Music Coalition. I'm also our policy director. And I want to just share a couple thoughts about what this conference is, what we're going to experience over the next couple days, sort of frame some of the discussions that we're going to have. It's really, really great and very meaningful, I think, for us to be back here at Gaston Hall. For those of you who were at the first summits, you know, which were very much kind of like, hey kids, let's put on a show. And were really kind of unusual and fun and a little bit crazy kind of conversations about the music technology space and all the complicated issues facing the music community as we went through this digital transition. One of the questions that kind of emerged out of those first couple of conferences, the first couple of summits, we kind of would hear over and over again. It's kind of this two-part question. Who are these people, and what do they want? There's a lot of questions about future music. You know, what is the agenda? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? What's the game plan? And really, to boil it down, what we want is this. We want this conference, we want this conversation. It's very clear that there's no easy 5-point plan to figure out how you create a legitimate digital music marketplace. These are phenomenally complicated issues. And of course, it's our feeling that the policy decisions that get made in Washington, D.C. have a lot more to do with the landscape of the music community than people tend to give credit to or that people tend to realize. So what we want is this multi-layered conversation with over 100 speakers coming to share their own personal perspectives. For years, Jenny Toomey collected on her desktop she had this great little folder on her computer of the solution. 2 or 3 times a year, someone would email her with the solution. I figured it out. Here it is. And we know that it doesn't exist. There is no solution. But it's always been our feeling that if you can get together technologists, policymakers, business leaders, artists, entrepreneurs, you get them together, you get them in conversation with each other. Different people have different pieces of information, and then you start to see some ideas emerge. Now, for us, as I said before, policy really matters. And what's important to recognize is that even the policy decisions that are faced by Washington are not even that easy to understand oftentimes. There's this tremendous gray area where we look at these policy questions and policy decisions, and we put them into a simple frame. Like, what does this mean for the music community? Somebody wants to pass a law, what does this mean for artists? Somebody's trying to push through regulations, what does this mean for artists? There's a lot of gray area, and I think today in the conversation you're going to hear a lot of that, particularly this afternoon. There are some issues, though, that we do think are black and white, that we think there are clear policy directions we've been working on for nearly 10 years. We think it's absolutely vital that we once and for all step up and reform commercial radio. We need to hold the line of consolidation. We need to expand and protect community radio. We need to end structural payola. We need to have a culture at the Federal Communications Commission that values data collection, that values information, transparency, and public input. It's absolutely past time, to pass the public performance rate for terrestrial broadcasting. And we need to do this in a way that doesn't undercut local broadcasters who are trying to actually do the right thing by playing local and independent music. We need to not undercut the community radio infrastructure, but we need to create this terrestrial performance right. We need broadband deployment. We need to make sure that there's a competitive marketplace that all Americans can participate in. That means that musicians in the music community has access to the tools they need, technology they need at competitive prices, with appropriate levels of service. We also need to make sure that more music fans, music consumers have access to the networks they need in a competitive network so they're paying less money for better service and are hopefully participating in legal licensed means of accessing music. We need net neutrality. And you're going to hear a lot about net neutrality today, but we need to make sure that innovators and the people who are creating the next generation of music services and applications have the right to reach consumers, that if we have a monopoly or duopoly with internet access, that those companies don't have the ability to pick and choose what services and applications music fans are able to get to. We need to have transparent and understandable net neutrality rules and regulations. We need a commitment to rebuild New Orleans. We spent a lot of time in New Orleans the last 3 or 4 years. We're going to be having a lot of discussions about this today. The federal government needs to do their part to make sure that the music community has the resources and the tools that they need to complete this transformation and the rebirth of that incredibly important city. And obviously, we have to deal with the crisis of healthcare with musicians. This is a much broader debate. It's a very complicated debate. But everybody in the music community knows that there's an absolute gap in service for musicians and for members of the music community. We have to resolve those issues. Okay, so what are we doing at this conference? Today, everybody's seen the program. Today, you know what we're going to get. We're going to have panels. We're going to have a couple of keynote speeches. We're going to have some interviews. We're going to have a lot of information, a lot of stuff coming at you. And what we've tried to do with our staff and our board and our advisory board and our community friends and colleagues that we've been working with to program this conference for nearly a year, what we've wanted to do is try to balance what we've done well in previous conferences, but also we want to try to break down the traditional wall where there's a stage and then there's an audience and then there are people watching online. So what we're doing is something a little bit different. Today's program is, as you know, panels, keynotes, interviews. Tomorrow, we're really going to blow things up and do things a little bit differently. We're going to have a very, very, very exciting morning session with interviews and presentations from Spotify. We're going to hear from Seth Hurwitz from IMP, who's going to be interviewed by Ian McCaughan. I don't know if everybody's heard that. Ian's going to come tomorrow and interview Seth. That's going to be incredibly fun. Nicole Adkins is talking to Mike Doyle. We're talking about New Orleans. We're going to have a great morning session. And then we're going to break up into, I think, like 10 niche-oriented breakout sessions that are going to be more like working groups. So they're not going to be like panels. They're going to be, come ready to talk, to participate, to be active participants in these conversations. Then we're going to close the session Tuesday back here at Gaston, and it's going to be a town hall. Now, we thought about doing this town hall thing before the summer got a little crazy with town hall meetings, so I don't know that we want, like people shouting and yelling and that kind of stuff, but we're going to have people, we're going to have floor mics. Basically, it's going to be an opportunity for us all to come together and try to process what's happened over the last couple of days and really try to share your enthusiasm, your ideas, your reflections, what you're worried about, what you're excited about. Again, with the idea that hopefully what's happening as a participant in this conference is you're meeting people, you're hearing ideas, you're getting thoughts, you're sharing your own vision, and all these little complicated pieces start to come together and build a bigger whole. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that one of the things that we've added to this conference that we feel very, very strongly about and are incredibly excited about is the rock show tonight. Now, a lot of folks are going, it's a benefit for Sweet Home New Orleans. It's featuring Bonorama with some special guests, Erin McCaughan, Martine Perina, Wayne Kramer. We're going to have some other surprises. It's crosstown to Rock and Roll Hotel. If you don't have your ticket yet, please check in with Nicole Duffy today at some point and make sure that she knows you want to go. We're trying to arrange bus transportation to get people there and get people back and try to make it easy for everybody, but we need to know if you're going. So I just really encourage you to check in with Nicole on the registration table, get your ticket, make sure people know. So anyway, I wanted to wrap up with that. I wanted to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank everybody for their input and their ideas as we've built this conference. I want to thank Georgetown and our friends Anna Chalenza, Bernie Cook, and the other staff here. I want to thank the Future Music staff who have worked incredible hours to try to pull us off. And again, welcome and thank you. Jean?
Thanks, Michael. So, let's get started. The first panel is the DIY panel. We are endlessly fascinated at Future Music Coalition by how artists from Radiohead to Erin McCaughan are taking control of their careers. Many are tweaking or completely bypassing traditional models for recording, promotion, and distribution, and bravely blazing their own path. Our first panel of the day, the new DIY, Creative Control in an Accelerated World, will examine the many ways that artists are using to get their music to audiences, from one-off licensing arrangements to online home concerts and more. As always, we're particularly interested in finding out what works, as well as any potential pitfalls that accompany the re-engineering of the DIY model. Our speakers include Bertis, who's a longtime advisor for R.E.M. McCaughan is the co-owner of Merge Records and a member of Superchunk and Portastatic. Music journalist and entrepreneur Yancey Strickler, whose new project Kickstarter is re-energizing the fan patronage model. Erin McKeown is a musician who knows a thing or two about how to directly engage and inspire fans. And Emily White is a partner in Whitesmith Entertainment and a trailblazer in building fan relationships using online strategies. And we've got an incredible moderator in Greg Kot of the Chicago Tribune and NPR's Sound Opinions program. Greg has a new book out called Ripped, which is a fascinating play-by-play of the changes we'll be talking about in the course of the summit. Let's give them all a warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming at this early rock and roll, non-rock and roll hour here. I applaud you for getting up at this hour. Thank you very much for the nice intro. We got a great panel today to start things off. I guess what I should talk about maybe is a little bit how this came together. I've been covering this particular conference since its inception. I think you all out in the audience, those of you who have been here, know how good this conference is, but I, as a journalist, I have to say, this has been the single most important conference on music and technology of the last decade. In a lot of ways, this is the most forward-looking conference. And it was a huge inspiration for writing this book. We had a lot of communication with the FMC folks over the summer about the book and about doing a panel regarding it. And I think the areas that we sort of intersect on, I wrote this book from the spirit of tremendous optimism about where the music business is going. And primarily because of two things. I think what this conference has looked at over the years and what it has done so well is the idea that, one, we talk about DIY, okay? In the 80s, DIY meant underground, obscure, impossible to get played on commercial radio, basically a life destined to obscurity. Doing it yourself was about an aesthetic of integrity and of making music for music's sake, and therefore it had nothing to do, in a lot of ways, with the marketplace of the mainstream. Now, I think we're living in a world where every artist is DIY to some extent, no matter how big you are. So the DIY aesthetic has become the way music people must approach their careers. Two pertinent examples, I think. You look at somebody like Dan Deacon, who is an artist who basically toured the country by, first of all, finding his equipment in garbage dumpsters at universities. So he got his keyboards and his computers from out of garbage dumpsters because he couldn't afford to pay for them. Now, this is a classically educated guy. Great musician, but, you know, poor, just like most musicians are when they start out. He tours the country in a Greyhound bus. So basically, he's got his equipment strapped to his back, and he tours around the country. He basically is not on the mainstream radar in any way, shape, or form. And yet he plays the Pitchfork Music Festival a couple years ago in Chicago. I covered it. And one of the things that occurred there, where he played at a stage which could accommodate maybe 1,000 people. When Dan played his set that evening up against some pretty heavyweight competition around the festival grounds that night, about 5 times as many people showed up as they were predicting would show up in that small space. And Dan single-handedly just about ended that festival because a near riot broke out. A fence was busted open onto a main drag in Chicago. There were people dancing on the median strip across the street. You know, the cops came, they pulled the plug on the show. I talked to Dan the next day, and he goes, you know, there's no way anybody could have predicted that. I'm not on SoundScan. I don't have a video. No radio station in the country is playing me. There's no way. The traditional metrics for measuring the success or the draw of a performer like that did not apply to that situation. They thought, well, a few hundred people will come and see this guy. Nobody knows who he is, you know. 5,000 people came to see that guy, and it was the talk of the festival. You know, how did that happen? We're going to talk about that at this panel today. Dan Deacon is one example. He's one end of the extreme. Look at somebody like Trent Reznor at the other end of the extreme. Reznor, you know, was having a tough time selling records on Interscope at the end of his career there. He had huge success in the early 90s. Later on, the records weren't selling so well. He did better on his own. When you think about when he released that 4-volume box set of instrumental music in March of 2008, the press campaign for that consisted of a single sentence on his website. That was it. That was the only way he put the word out about that. He informed no journalists. He informed no PR people. He didn't do a big marketing campaign. He put out a 1-sentence statement on his website: this music will be available here within the hour. And from there, he ended up selling, you know, $1.7 million worth of, you know, product connected to that release in 1 week. Now you're saying, well, he's Trent Reznor. He can do that. Well, certainly. But I think what Reznor did that week, and it's worth studying. It's something that I spent a couple of chapters on in the book, because I think what he did there was the second part of this equation. Every artist is DIY. Secondly, he turned his fans not into a faceless marketing demographic, but into co-conspirators. He turned them into collaborators. He brought them into his world and made them feel a part of what he was doing, you know, by doing things like giving them a choice, for example. You know, he had a whole scheme of options available to those fans. How do you want to access this music? Do you want it for free? I'm going to give you 9 tracks for free. Do you want to sample it in a, you know, a smaller format? I'll give you the digital download for $5. Do you want it as a physical product? I'll give you the CD for $10. You know, all the way on up to the fan who's really hardcore. You know, I'll sell you that box set and I'll sign it, and it'll be vinyl copies available with it, and there'll be beautiful artwork with it. It's an art object. It is a scarce good. I'll sell it to you for $300. Well, he sold out of all that stuff because he treated the fans not as somebody he's just selling stuff to, but as, you know, part of his world, somebody he cares about. Not only that, allowing them to remix music, make videos for him, becoming co-conspirators, collaborators. So this essential relationship has changed, the artist and the fan. That is the central change of the last 10 years, and it's something worth documenting, and we're still in the middle of that. We're living in a historic time right now. Everything is changing. We are lucky to be alive right now because, you know, the world doesn't change that often, you know. Things stay the same for long periods of time. We are now in the middle of a historic change. Everything will be different when we emerge from this. We got a great panel here to start investigating some of these ideas here, and I want to turn to them for some input. First of all, let me just briefly introduce who we've got here. Everybody should know Bertis Downs with R.E.M. Every person in this room, I'm sure, would love to have a 30-year run like R.E.M. has, and not only that, a 30-year run, but also remaining relevant for 30 years, able to maintain that relevance. McCaughan, you know, creative force in Superchunk and Portastatic, co-owner of a little label called Merge, not so little anymore. You know, artists like Arcade Fire, Spoon, the list goes on. An amazing independent label out of North Carolina. Emily White, who's the co-founder of Whitesmith Entertainment, a real innovator in this business. Many stories. I guess Emily's probably most associated with, and you're probably sick and tired of telling the Amanda Palmer story by now, but I promise you there'll be many updates on that within the next hour. And Erin McKeown is a singer, musician, producer out of Massachusetts. Has produced, what is it, about 8 records?
Yeah, the 7th one comes out next week.
One comes out next week, so it's close. Prolific artist, doing it on her own. You know, in terms of the definition of DIY, Erin's next record is coming out on Righteous Babe. Ani DeFranco is an artist who is ahead of this curve, the founder of Righteous Babe Records. So I think it's somewhat appropriate that Erin, who was picking up that torch the last decade, is going to be part of that label. And last but not least, Yancey Strickler, who is a fascinating person in that he gave up journalism to go on to a legitimate career in the music business with Kickstarter. You know, Kickstarter is great because they do give you a very detailed overview of what they are on their website. But at a certain point, they just say, Google Josh Freese, you know? And it's like, okay, Google Josh Freese, that'll tell you exactly what this label can do for you. Basically, a 5-person operation, Yancey being one of them, that, you know, creates money-raising tools for creative projects. And fascinating business model. So we want to talk a little bit about this concept of DIY. We want to talk about this concept of fans as co-conspirators in what artists do. You know, let's start with Bertis. Bertis, in terms of where R.E.M. is at, you know, in some ways, people would look at R.E.M. and say, okay, wait a minute, DIY, R.E.M., major label, does not compute. Obviously, you started there.
I was feeling somewhat lost up here, I got to admit. I kind of wandered in, it's the one they put me on.
Well, you know, my whole point is that, you know, R.E.M. has maintained a certain amount of relevance, and you've done stuff on your own, even though you're on this label. I look at what you've done in the last couple of years, for example, starting with those shows in Dublin in 2007. And the way I see it, maybe you could shed a little light on this. The last 2 or 3 years.
It's funny, you were just talking about fan engagement and stuff, and I was thinking about, you know, the DIY. I was thinking about when R.E.M. was truly DIY, and, you know, we literally went to New York with some cassettes of the first 3 songs, Radio Free Europe, sitting still in an instrumental called White Tornado on a little cassette, and it was called the cassette set. And, you know, that's what got the thing going in New York when they played after being about a year, and I was up there the following summer when they actually had the single out in 1981, and I took some singles to Bleecker Bob's and Rocks in My Head, and you know, made a very small business deal with the people who run these places, and I called the band up and told them they now had distribution in New York. So I was a fan, and I was involved in their career very early on. I mean, that was about as DIY as you could get.
Yeah.
And they've sort of kept their, if you know anything about R.E.M. at all, they kind of do things their way, for better or for worse. They make the records they want to make. They decide when they're going to tour. Their 2 biggest records happen to be years they didn't tour. Out of Time and Automatic wasn't really part of the formula to not go out on tour, but they didn't feel like touring those years. It really wouldn't have made sense for them. And that was not something that the good people at Warner Brothers were particularly thrilled about when we sort of let them know there's not going to be a tour in '91 or the following record. But they happened to make really good records, partly because they didn't have to worry about what it was going to sound like when they went out on a stage with lights and, you know, was there enough guitar and all. They made the records they wanted to make, and it kind of worked out that way. That also feels a little bit prehistoric now, you know, because it was back in the sort of early '90s when the world really was very different. So R.E.M. has kind of maintained a bit of a DIY approach, just the way they approach their career, what they choose to do artistically, when they want to make a record, when they want to do side projects, the kind of stuff Peter gets involved with. Peter is not on Merge Records, but I think he's played on a few of Mac's records over the years, including recently. And they've kind of always had a fairly creative DIY approach. I can keep going for a minute about Dublin, or I can let other people talk and come back. I would like to talk about the Dublin stuff at some point, but we got a long time, and I don't want to.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on that. And this is probably, you know, a panel in itself, but you have this relationship with Warner. Are you a little bit envious of, or in any way want to find yourself in a position soon where you know, the Radioheads and the Pearl Jams of the world are now, where they are pretty much free to do what they want to do with anybody they want to do it with.
No, I see what you're saying, and I'm not going to answer that. But you know, the fact of the matter is life is long, and you know, you have different type. You know, we signed with a label at first that was called IRS that was kind of a major, but they were sort of a boutique, and they'd had a couple of quasi-hits, but they were real credible artists, but they were distributed through A&M, which is a major. And so it gets, I mean, we have really good relationships at Warner's. I mean, Warner's is a wonderful place to be an artist because of the philosophy of the company from the founding of it, and they truly believe that artists should do what the artist is led to do. So that's not really an issue for us. But I mean, every year that goes by and you see what all the other options are that are out there and the kinds of ways people are doing things. The Dublin thing that you brought up earlier was kind of interesting. The band decided to do these 5 shows in a place about this size in the Olympia Theater, and we spent a few months planning it and announced it, and we figured out a good way to get the fan club to buy the tickets earlier. We sent them an email an hour earlier than anybody else, so our fan club was able to buy the tickets before everybody else. And so as a result, people traveled from all over, and they did these 5 nights to play new material, and they decided they'd also play a bunch of old stuff, including some, you know, stuff they don't play very much anymore, things they hadn't played since the 80s. And one thing we decided to do was put a little site up that was, I'd read an article in New Yorker about Wikipedia, so I was kind of fascinated by that. I thought maybe we should put a site up that's kind of all things R.E.M. in Dublin this week. And we encourage people to blog, and this is Scout's honor. When we said people put up their own blogs and stuff, I didn't really think they'd be posting MP3s. Well, they were. And so then the question came up, do we care? And the question was answered pretty simply, well, no, because they're going to do it anyway, and why not have it be on our site? Well, that was somewhat, it doesn't seem all that edgy, but 3 years ago, that was a little bit like for a major label band, songs that haven't been recorded yet, haven't been released yet, to have them, fans posting YouTube stuff. But we found that the benefit from that was the songs were good, and people got excited about it, and it really started, you know, I'm sure people like Greg Cott and others noticed, hey, there's something going on with this R.E.M. thing in Dublin. It was all because we decided to put up this, you know, we didn't really know what we were doing, making it up as we went along, but this user-generated site that generated quite a bit of interest in the song. So.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, you know, what I was talking about earlier is the fans became invested in the process, and as a result, there was a tremendous amount of attention built around the band. And one thing I find unique is that, you know, bands tend to lose their steam after a while. It's just, you know, they fall off the radar. And R.E.M. got a whole new gust of wind behind them, you know, as a result of that, you know, carried over to the making of that studio record. Because we heard those songs in 2007, and suddenly people were invested in those songs. Hey, that sounded really great. The Accelerate record, you know, put you guys back on the map, and now I know you're doing a DVD, right?
Well, we recorded everything, and they, over the course of the 5 nights, they played the 11 new songs. They then, you know, sprinkled in little chestnuts. Michael kept calling them olive branches. You people have come so far to hear us play these new songs. Let's play Sitting Still and Carnival of Sorts for you, which are songs they don't play every day. We've recorded them all, and we're going to release them in a little while. We're putting out it's a double CD and a DVD.
So it turned into like a 2-year revenue stream for the band, starting by just basically giving the bands the freedom to do what the hell they wanted with something they were excited about.
It was an experiment, you know, and it worked. So far, it seems like it worked, and it certainly informed that by playing the songs in a live setting like that, they accomplished what they wanted to. How did they like them, and what changed when they went in to record them? So creatively, it was great for the band, and it challenged them. It kind of shook them up a little bit, which is what they wanted.
Right, Erin, I got to ask you, you know, you've done something similar. You've you know, videotaped your shows, your concerts, except they're in unusual settings. Like I think I saw you one where you were wading knee-deep in water with your band, right, basically? And you videotaped that, put that up, webcast that. How does that work with you in terms of getting your fans invested in what you're doing?
Well, I think for me as an artist, I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've had my own label, I've been on a tiny independent label, I was on a mini major for a while, and I came to a place this summer where I had a record that I wanted to make without anyone's money except my own, because I don't know, that just felt like the right thing to do to me, right? Make the car and then see if somebody wants to drive it. And so I made a record on my own, and 2 things were happening about what we're talking about, the new DIY. One was that I had this debt from a record that I had put my own money into. And then there's this new world where the big question is, as an artist, how are you interacting with the changing face of things? Like I said, I've been doing this for 10 years, so when I started out, for me as an artist starting out, I was waiting for a label to do everything for me. And that's not the case anymore at all. And as an artist, you get told, oh, you're supposed to Twitter all the time, have a Facebook, do this, do that. And for me as a person, that felt artificial. This is my own, relationship with computers and relationship with social networking. It felt artificial to me, and it felt like I can't have a T-shirt contest. I don't, how am I gonna interact in this new world and still have it feel like me? So what I came up with was the idea of doing a variety show on the internet. And basically, it's a cross between Wayne's World and the Judy Garland show. And I called it Cabin Fever. I live in a tiny cabin in western Massachusetts on a river. And I decided to do 4 internet house concerts. One from my living room, one from my front porch, one from the river, which we're going to look at in just a second, and one from my front yard. And the culminating one, I would play my new record in sequence in the front yard. A lot of what Bertis was talking about before the record's out, getting people excited about these songs, having fans get attached to them. And I sold the password for the stream, $10 for one concert, $30 for the series of 4. And it was pass the hat to raise money for my record. I told my fans this was raising money for the record, but it was also important to me that there was a creative integrity to it for myself. Like, this was something I was interested in creatively, was this idea of a variety show. And it felt like a way for me to be me in this sort of new world.
We want to play one of them?
Yeah, would you do Float On, an internet baptism? Just before you play it, let me tell you this. This is, sorry. That's all right, just pause for 1 second.
Sorry. I'll get there.
This is for the water episode. This is my river. This is right below my porch in my house. And what we did was we decided it was all my music for the other 3 episodes, but for the water episode, we played songs about water.
What would OSHA say about this? I mean, was there any kind of OSHA? Would they have any kind of?
Well, I have to tell you that my landlords were not happy. I have to say they were worried that someone would electrocute themselves or slip and fall. It actually never occurred to me. So anyway, this is us playing a bit of a Modest Mouse song, and we should check it out for a second, and then skip to the end, maybe about 3 minutes, and I got baptized in the waters of the internet by a real reverend at the end. So go ahead and...
Friend Monty,
if you start at the beginning, you'll hear some of the song.
Okay, it's all right. Back to the beginning. Sorry.
And we'll all float on, okay. And we'll all float on, all right. Already we're all float on, all right. Already we're all float on, all right.
We got a lot of rain the night before. My river is usually not that deep, but we got a lot of rain the night before. So as you can see, these are other artists. It's Jose Ayerve of the band Spouse, who's singing with me, and a couple other singer-songwriter friends of mine. And you get an idea of it. And if you just flip to the end, we'll just see a tiny second of the baptism. There you go. That's probably good there.
Okay.
We go down to the river, and into the river we dive. We go down to the river, we ride. Aye, aye, aye. Down to the river. Singing songs of joy and peace. I wish we had a river I could skate away on. A moon river, wider than a mile. I'm crossing you in style today. Definitely. And it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
That's good. Thank you. So that's the style of the show.
That's a show I think everybody wants to go to now.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, they are available. I made them available for streaming afterwards. You can pay-per-view and still watch them. Same deal, $10 an episode, $30 for the series. That goes for a week. But if you buy it for a year for a different price, you also get the soundtrack album that you can download. It's not copyright protected or anything like that. So, this is, again, I think for me in terms of the new DIY, it's something that, in terms of who I am as an artist and who I am as a person, this feels like me. This doesn't feel like somebody else's idea of how I'm supposed to gather Facebook friends or MySpace friends or any of that stuff. And you know, I think your question is, does this work or does this not work? It's worked for me. Monetarily, it's worked for me. Details, it's not as much money as I had hoped to raise from it. But for me also as an artist, again, my job is to have ideas. And it felt really, really good to me to have an idea in the new world. And it felt like I had a foothold as an artist, as bringing something new to the table. So even though I didn't fund my record entirely from this project, I had a blast.
That's part of it. Now, backstage, we were talking a little bit, and you had, about 10 minutes before we went on stage, you turned to Yancey and said, I wish I'd known about Kickstarter a little sooner. Everybody's talking about Kickstarter, Yancey. I think it's been a huge phenomenon in the last 6 months even, explain a little bit about what it is you do and how people benefit from it.
Sure. Kickstarter opened about 5 months ago. It's a fan funding platform basically for creative projects. So it's a way for Erin or anyone really to go on and raise money for something they want to do. And we do it by making people set a funding goal that they have to reach by a deadline that they set, and then you offer sort of tiers of rewards like we were talking about with Trent Reznor before in exchange. So $5 download, $10 CD, $30 LP, you know, $300, I'll write a song for you, that sort of thing. But the one really interesting that Erin said that I think plays into this is that she was talking about trying to find some sort of platform or way to interact that felt natural to her, and how Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff just didn't make sense. And I think that's true for a lot of people, and that even though we're more connected, in quote marks, than ever with Twitter and Facebook and all these things, they're very trivial connections. It's a lot of just sort of promotional crosstalk that doesn't really result in a whole lot, and there's not a lot of value being exchanged. And so we see Kickstarter as sort of a different level of that, and a way for people to engage with fans however they want, and a way for fans to have a really direct relationship with artists. So we just launched 5 months ago. Today, actually, this morning, we crossed $1 million in pledges in our first 5 months to projects. Thank you. So it's been doing really well, and you know, there are a lot of great projects maybe we'll show on the screen at a certain point. This woman, Allison Weiss, that's right on her homepage, actually, it would be a great one to show, who's this woman from Georgia who has she's 22, she has a Tumblr and Twitter following, and really that's about it. And she wanted to raise $2,000 to make a new EP and gave herself 60 days to do it. And she has this video that's just, you know, you just want to pay $5 to hug her and be her friend, basically. And there it is right there, the top left one right there. Yeah, she's from Athens. But she did things like for $300, she would write a song about you. For $500, she would make you a personal mixtape of whatever songs of hers that you wanted, done acoustically with a hand-drawn cover, this whole thing. But she raised $2,000 in 10 hours. She put it up and immediately got funded. And the first thing she did when she got funded is she posted a Skype video chat with the girl in Australia who put her over the $2,000 mark. And the cuteness there is just off the charts. And she ended up raising almost $8,000. And this is someone without a big following. This is someone that's just really good at talking to their fans, that had interesting things to offer. And she had a lot of success. Will you play a little bit of the video?
Sure.
I wrote a song.
Maybe a little load from
Dear
that.
Internet, I need your help. I'm trying to make a CD. Hello Internet, my name is Allison Weiss. You may know me from the internet or from real life. I'm coming to you today because I need your help. I'm recording a new EP in June and it's going to be really good. I mean, I think it's going to be good. You'll probably like it. It's going to be released in the fall and it's going to be on a digipack, much like my last CD that you see right here. Eco-friendly. I don't know if you know this about me, but I do everything all by myself. I don't have a label or a manager or any of that stuff. So I'm trying to raise $2,000 to press the first 1,000 copies. If you donate, not only are you going to help me out a lot, but you're going to get cool things like exclusive tracks and pre-releases and like limited edition stuff. But we'll talk about that later. So here are some reasons why you should donate to my new EP. Reason number 1, we are friends. It's pretty obvious. Reason number 2, you like me. I am assuming. If not, you should probably just turn off the video now. Here's number 3. I promise it won't suck. Now, some of you might disagree when it comes out, but I don't think that you will. Season number 4, you can be part of a great thing. And that is making my new EP.
So yeah, so that's...
And number 5...
Oh, we'll let her finish. So that's Allison. And so it works for not just music, it's all sorts of creative projects, photography, all these things. We had our first $50,000 project this weekend, these team of photographers going to Cambodia to photograph the traditional Cambodian musicians. There's a Obama book that's going to cross $65,000 this week. So people sort of up and down the food chain have been able to use this, and really it works for all these people because you walk away with complete ownership of your work. You do whatever you want. We're just simply a platform. We want to help you, go do what you want to do.
Well, it's fascinating because you see there that, she can be totally herself. Erin was talking about, I want to be myself. And I think that, that's very much the DIY thing. And, in, the 80s and 90s, if you wanted to be yourself and not play along with everybody else's rules, you were immediately consigned to this ghetto. You don't belong with the mainstream. You're a fringe artist. And now you can be, you don't have to be fringe. And I think that's the key change. The other thing, she said, I don't have a label, I don't have a manager, I don't have an agent. Well, I think one of the myths, too, about what's happening right now is that, okay, maybe you don't need the traditional record industry, per se, but you do still need infrastructure of some sort. It's kind of a myth to say, I can do this all by myself, You still need a little bit of help. It doesn't necessarily be in the form of Warner Brothers, but it can be. It can take many forms. I want to talk to, let's bring in Mac here. Mac, it's not the easiest time to be running a label right now, yet you guys seem to be doing a pretty good job of it. What is it that keeps bringing bands to your label? Obviously, there are other ways they can do things right now. They can do it on their own. It's been proven that you don't really need a label to get a record out anymore. But in your case, I don't think you ever run out of bands that want to be on Merge. And you're doing a pretty good job of actually helping those bands get successful.
I feel so old-fashioned having just a record label. Yeah, I mean, I think that even when we started Merge in 1989, I kind of feel like what we're doing for bands as a label is all the things that they don't want to do or don't have time to do. And so, I think that the internet, as great as it is such a double-edged sword in the sense that it's just so vast and it's a morass if you're actually trying to find something or trying to have people find you, I think. Because I will often do interviews where people say, well, why do you need a record label? You can just have a MySpace page and then you get fans that way. And I mean, I wouldn't want to be relying on that as a way to for people to find my music if I was just starting out as a band. So, I think that over the 20 years since Merge has been around, one thing that we've done is hopefully fostered this relationship between ourselves as a label and fans. So that one thing that we offer is a sense of trust that if you've been buying Merge records for 5 years or 10 years, you have a sense that you're going to, you're probably going to like, if you like all the other records that you have that are on Merge, you're probably going to like a record by a band that you've never heard of that's on Merge. You may not like it as much as your favorite band on Merge, but hopefully we've built up a sense of trust in that relationship between ourselves and fans, and that's the only way that we can exist, because in other words, file sharing is such an interesting thing, and Greg wrote a book about it, but we always felt like when major labels were complaining that file sharing was killing the music industry, it was exactly like major labels complaining that home taping was going to kill the music industry, which it did not, and that they were blaming file sharing on, they were blaming their woes on file sharing instead of all the terrible decisions that they'd made leading up to that. And so for us, I feel like I am going somewhere with this. For us, I feel like we may lose some sales to file sharing on our largest records, like an Arcade Fire record or a Spoon record or something like that. I'm sure that there are people who are just casual music fans who hear about those bands and they go get that record for free and listen to it a few times and don't really care about it after that. And so we're losing some sales, but at the same time, I feel like most of our artists who don't reach that level of selling 300, 400,000 records, most of the people who are interested in those bands are going to buy those CDs because they're fans. And real music fans realize that the artists need to be supported in order to keep making the art that the fans like. And so the only way that merge can exist is if we keep creating new music fans. And the way to do that is to put out great records. And so, because we can't rely on our biggest records, we can't rely on having records that sell 300,000 or 400,000 copies consistently. We have to rely on those hardcore fans that are going to buy 5,000 copies of a record, or 2,000 copies of a record, or 20,000 copies of a record. And so I feel like what we do for bands and what we do as a label is offer that relationship that we already have with those fans. In addition to, like I said, starting out, doing all the stuff that they don't want to do, the infrastructure, the day-to-day stuff, the busy work, because they should be writing songs and recording records and touring.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're coming at it from both sides because you're an artist as well. And when you talk about the stuff that you don't want to do as an artist, it seems disingenuous at the same time for an artist to be coming to the World Now Mac and say, I don't want to be, I'm not really interested in that stuff. I mean, are you finding that the bands and artists that you're signing now are a little bit more savvy or in tune or desiring to be more involved in that, or is it pretty much the way it was back in the early 90s when Merge started, where it was kind of like, gee, I want a label to do all this stuff, I just don't want to be bothered with it?
I feel like new bands that we work with, like there's a young band from Baltimore named called Y Oak. That's a great band, and they're 22 years old or something. They're really young, and I feel like bands have more of a sense than we did probably when we started out as to what goes into making a CD and promoting it and the ways that there are to promote it and stuff like that. But at the same time, I also feel like they still don't want to necessarily spend their time doing that, except for what I think is the most important way to promote music still, which is playing live concerts and touring. I mean, oddly enough, I think that the most old-fashioned way of promoting music is still the best way to make that connection with fans.
Mm-hmm. Let's continue with this thread about infrastructure. Emily, I was struck by your story on a number of levels, but one about just the, can I say just the ballsiness of what you've done? Just basically creating a job for yourself in a lot of ways, because you thought, hey, you don't know, you're not going to know if you don't ask, right? I mean, that's basically how it started. So when you're talking about being a new businesswoman in this world, how do I fit in? It's not about plugging into an already made job. In some ways, it's about inventing your own job and saying, this is how I can help you as an artist get to where you want to get. So if you could just sort of talk a little bit about that. And I know you've got a band currently that you're working with that we want to talk about. But first talk about how you got into this business.
Ooh, how I got into this business. Lots of internships in college and tour managing. I met the Dresden Dolls when I was about 20. And Amanda Palmer had sold 10,000 albums out of her bedroom. She had no label or manager, and I asked her if she needed help, and she said, can you please come over tomorrow? So, I ended up going on the road with them and, worked with Dresden Dolls for 6 years, went all over the world, eventually became their co-manager. So that's kind of my background. But to answer what you're saying, we can sit up here and we can talk about models and platforms and strategies, but there is no, one-stop shopping. Like, the plan needs to be tailored around each artist, whether it's Erin playing in the river or, using Kickstarter. It really does have to be tailored. You can't just use one of these tools and think that magic's going to happen. You need to, specifically focus on what the artist is doing.
Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about Family of the Year. You've developed a lot of artists over the years. You know, Whitesmith Entertainment, your new corporation, is I think, kind of a new model for how bands are approaching their careers. And I know you're getting into like record making and distribution and all that as well, right? I mean, you know, you talk about these 360 deals. It seems to me like you're kind of inventing that business model for yourself.
Yeah, we're kind of like a walking a la carte 360 or all right. I actually worked at Live Nation Artists last year too, so I've been on the absolute corporate side, you know, under Michael Cole and Bob Ezrin with the Madonna, Jay-Z, U2 deals. So I've seen all ends of it, but you know, I've been approached by artists, and like I said, I like figuring out what they need, and we try to offer every service, whether it's internet marketing, PR, booking, management, and not every artist needs that. You know, the Fiery Furnaces approached me, and taking 15–20% of their income is a lot, but they did need somebody to help with their internet marketing and their touring. So I think you just need to, you know, figure out exactly what you need, because it's going to be different for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And what about you know, Family of the Year is the latest project. This is a band you're basically starting from the grassroots level.
Literally 2 months ago.
Yeah.
They emailed me their MySpace page. I've been friends with Joe and Sebastian Keefe for 6 years. They had a wonderful band in Boston called Unbusted years ago that I loved in college. So they sent me their MySpace page 2 months ago. You know, 60 seconds in, I was absolutely blown away with the music. And that's why we're all here. We have to remember to make great art also, otherwise, what's the point? You know, so I actually had them change their name. They were called Bogey Ogerton, which is terrible. So, you know, there's brothers in the band, there's a couple in the band, and there's 6 of them. And there's a web designer in the band. Christina, who plays keyboards, used to work at a PR firm, so she wrote the bio, she runs the Twitter page and the social networks. And, you know, that's got to be a fine balance for sure, you know, because they do need to be focusing on music. But it means a lot when they can tell it's definitely coming from the band and not one of my interns. There's a sound engineer in the band that, you know, they handed me 30 songs that they had recorded in their practice space and mixed and mastered it and, you know, ready to go. Vanessa from the band's been designing the merch and the artwork. And Joe Keefe is absolutely a genius, brilliant songwriter, so I don't let him email me. He keeps his head in music where it should be. And his little brother, Sebastian, ties it all together and is kind of the liaison from me to the band. So we self-released their debut EP 10 days ago. It's donation-based. Up at some point. And our average donations have been about $10 for 5 songs. We've, you know, they've been as high as $50. And, you know, there's a really beautiful artist statement from the band. You get it instantly, of course. You can stream it. You can also get a physical copy. And it's, yeah, .net. Otherwise, it's some Christian family site. And, yeah, so there we go. So we did all this ourselves, and the web design is by a wonderful nonprofit called Cash Music that's building open source technology. So you can check it all out right there. And, you know, I think we've gotten 1,000 unique views in about 10 days, and which was also helped. We submitted them for a contest through Sonic Bids to open for Ben Folds at the Boston Pops last week, and they won. And I called up Ben's manager and the woman that books the Boston Pops, and I said, hey, thanks so much. I don't, you know, any good word you put in, I appreciate it. And they said, Emily, this had nothing to do with us. Ben and Keith Lockhart selected Family of the Year out of 700 other artists to open at Symphony Hall last week. And I think it was their 4th show ever. So it's been a pretty wild ride, but it just goes to show you, it's like the technology is there to distribute your music worldwide. The music is so good that I just had to get it out to people, and, you know, I had 5 agents after them after their first show, and we have, I think, 6 unsolicited labels that have approached me. But, you know, in the meantime, while those labels get it together and figure out what they'd even want to offer us, you know, we're going to have a full length out next month. So. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It's come up a couple of times in this. Including in Allison's very charming video. And you just mentioned it again, Emily, you know, the music is really good. And you know, Allison assured us that her music didn't suck. And I would say that is perhaps the one element in all of this discussion that is perhaps most overlooked and yet is the most essential to the whole thing. I don't know how many of you were here yesterday, but, you know, we got those shocking stats on the 2008 releases. Over 115,000 albums were released in 2008, of which, a few hundred at most sold 250,000 copies or more, and less than 600, I think, sold more than 50,000 copies. I mean, it was just shocking how few records actually sold over the last year. And it's easy to sort of say, well, you know, consumers are downloading all this stuff or sharing it. But what's to say that all of those records deserve to be successful, you know? Just because you put out a record doesn't mean it's going to be a success. So you talk about what does a band need to do to succeed in 2008, and I'd say rule number one is don't suck, you know, because a lot of bands, frankly, do. I mean, they're just not, they don't deserve a mass audience. I want to turn to the panel again and talk about this issue because, you know, when I think about a band like R.E.M, Bertis, I think about a band that, you know, one of the first songs you heard out of that band was something like Gardening at Night, and you go right away, this band's pretty damn good, you know. I think they've, you know, if they can write about 30 more songs like this, they're going to be great.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah, and what would you say? You know, you must get asked this a million times, but let's put it out here in a public forum. Somebody says to you, Bertis, what do I need to do to have a career like R.E.M?
I really do say, it's funny you keyed in on that. We didn't plan this, but when I first saw R.E.M, which was the first time they ever played as R.E.M, they played at one birthday party show 2 weeks before, and they didn't have a name, but they decided they wanted to play something else and put posters up. But one thing you need for a poster is a name, so you have something to put on the poster. They finally named themselves R.E.M, and I just realized, you know, I was having a hard time figuring out which songs were the covers and which songs were the real songs. I mean, their songs sounded to me, I didn't know as much about the covers as some of the people I was with, but I had that thought, and bands who come to me now that have a few songs, I just tell them to write more songs. I mean, one thing R.E.M was really good at doing was throwing away and editing themselves. There's a lot of the songs they wrote those early years that were not maybe as good as Gardening at Night or too much like Gardening at Night that they discarded. And I think that's something that when you said that, it made me think the same thing. The key is if they're making good music, or if they're making music that makes them happy, which then might translate to a different world. The other thing that I picked up on in this round robin of us talking, it came up 3 or 4 times, and I think it applies in our little world as well, and especially as a band, you're very complimentary, say R.E.M's still relevant. I think that, you know, people are still interested in what they're doing and what the music is. But how you approach new media, how you approach, I'm not going to call it new media anymore, it's been around a while.
Current media.
Yeah, digital media and Twitter and whatever the next thing you haven't heard of is, and the stuff that keeps coming at you, you know, this barrage of like ways of reaching people and all. And that is, you know, you got to be yourself. You got to figure out who you are, and I think that you said it very eloquently, who you are and what's going to work for you. And I was thinking back to our little experience with that Dublin thing, our little wiki page. It became R.E.M Dublin. We decided to do the same thing for our whole tour. We thought, well, golly, if you do that for Dublin, you can do that for every show we're doing. So we put up this little thing called, it was off of our website, it was called R.E.M Tour. And if you were going to go to the show in Prague, or you were going to go to the show at Meriwether Post, or in Raleigh, or wherever you're going to be, you could go and see who, you know, it was a little meetup page. It was about, you know, blogs, and people could post their own photos. They could post their own videos. And there was this new thing called Twitter, and they could post their own twits. Well, I was standing in fields in England screaming at somebody in Burbank. There's not any Twitter posts going, well, it's down, you know, Twitter's down this week. And then, well, maybe of the 50,000 people there, none of them are tweeters. And I'm like, why are we doing it then? I mean, we were so early into this thing. Yeah. And so at the minute the tour was over, we did luckily have somebody on our tour, kind of associated with the band, who decided she would start tweeting the set list. And there were a few people out there who cared what the set list was on a real-time basis. So it was an early use of that, which we didn't really, our fans clearly were not yet using Twitter. This was over a year ago on our tour. But it was a way of using it, and now the question is, do we want to Twitch every 5 minutes? And the answer is no, we don't.
Twitch.
You know?
Twitch is good. I like
we're going to start Twitcher. The band doesn't want to do that. It's just not their personality. They don't want to do that stuff. At the same time, with a new record coming out and the fact that there is stuff going on, like, you know, the film showed in Minneapolis last week as part of a little film festival. We're on an occasional basis sending out a little text that, you know, I almost hate calling it because it's such a funny name, but we are doing it. So we're doing it a little bit when there's something relevant. We've made it very clear we're not going to do it every 5 minutes because that wouldn't fit the band's profile or their personalities.
Right. You know, it's also interesting to me that part of what we've been hearing is bands feeding, you know, their fans, you know, let's get stuff out there. Let's create value for access. You know, the more you invest in me, the more music you're going to get in return. Erin, you're very prolific. I want to talk to Mac about this as well, as artists, creative people. The sort of the need to feed the machine, Now that you've created this fan base and this expectation, what effect does that have on quality control for you as a creative person and as a songwriter?
It has a huge effect, and I think about this a lot, and there was a really wonderful article in the New York Times maybe 4 or 5 months ago that John Perellis wrote about this sort of demand for B content, this idea that, as an artist, I still believe in collecting 12 songs or an hour of music together as a statement. I still believe in the idea of an album, and as a creative person, I want to think that big or even bigger, I don't want to think on a 3-minute basis. For me, that's just what I'm interested in creatively. So it's really this machine that needs to be fed of what can we promise our fans that they can't get anywhere else, and what can we offer for exclusives with certain companies that want exclusives. For me as a songwriter, I made my 12 best songs, and I put them together in the way I wanted to. So if you're asking me for things I didn't put on the record, there's a reason I didn't put them on the record. So for me, again, Cabin Fever was a way to do that. It was a way for me to provide extra content around my album that had its own creative integrity. I like what Max said a lot about playing live, and what Bertis referred to too. I mean, that's the deal. Like, I've always felt as an artist, if I can't stand in a room of however many people and make them all pay attention to me with my music and with my songs, then I'm in the wrong position. That's always been the way I've looked at it. So how can I carry that into this current media world? I'm doing a tour this fall with Jill Sobule. Jill is another artist who's gotten quite a lot of recognition for a fan funding model. So Jill and I are teaming up this fall, and we're doing 40 dates together all around the country, and we'll see what happens with all this networking and stuff. Does 5,000 Facebook fans translate into how many people in the club? We're going to find out. One of the things we're doing, again, to feed the beast, is we're going to do a semi-regular talk show in the afternoon via Ustream, the Clash of the Legends radio hour. And, if you know Jill and you know her music, she's hilarious and a wonderful personality. So we're going to set up the MacBook, log on to Ustream. We'll let our fans know via Twitter and Facebook, Clash of the Legends on now. And we're just going to spend the afternoon. We'll play songs. We'll talk to each other. We're going to have guests. Again, this I think for us, this sort of variety show radio format really works for our personalities. So that's going to be random afternoons on the tour. And again, that's a way for us to provide content to our fans that still has a level of artistic integrity and spontaneity that I think is really important.
Well, it's interesting, excuse me, Mac, but just the whole idea of letting people into your world and not necessarily having to write a song, but doing other creative things around that.
I think that's something that, I was listening to Emily talk about all the players in her band that are doing all these different tasks that are there for an artist. I'm a solo artist. I mean, I have a band, but my deal has always been all the things that come out of my head. And I actually love the fact, I love building websites. I love figuring out Ustream. I love doing graphic design. Like, I'm so happy that I have an opportunity. I feel just as creative designing the logo and the website for Cabin Fever as I do writing a song. So for me, it's another outlet of my creativity. And if my fans know that, then that's important. My fans know that I made this visual as well as this music, so it's another way that they can experience my creativity.
I mean, I think a lot. I mean, what Erin just said about doing the design and everything, I think, reminds me that, I mean, most of the artists on Merge, well, when Superchunk started, I remember making the first record covers almost as exciting as recording the songs. It's like, oh, we get to make a record cover? It's going to be on a record and in stores, and, like all the record covers that I have in my house. I mean, it's like that's, I think most of the artists that we work with, they're thinking about the whole thing, and I too still think about albums as being a collection of songs that, like, that's the album. But having said that, as a fan and record buyer, growing up, I mean, I wanted the new R.E.M. album, but I also wanted the double 7-inch with the B-sides and this extra content, which right, it's not for the album because they didn't want it on the album, but as a fan, I want to hear kind of what a band's kind of side ventures are as well, you know, like what their kind of afterthoughts were that didn't quite work out, but they're still great to listen to if you like what that artist is doing. So I think that there's a real value to that kind of extra content. However, the accelerated media cycle with the internet is so insane that the demand for this content it's not just like, oh, you need a couple B-sides for that single that's going to come out, you know, a couple months before the record or whatever. It's, you know, you got to have content to continuously flow out there, or people are going to forget about that record because that record that they read about on Pitchfork or Dusted or wherever has been replaced 24 hours later by 5 more records and replaced 24 hours later by 5 more records. It's not like you're getting a copy of Rolling Stone and then, you know, reading a bunch of reviews and then 2 weeks later you get the next set of reviews. It's crazy. So it's a little bit insane, the demand for this stuff, but, you know, someone like Erin or, you know, artists that we work with, they have the capacity to come up with stuff that is still of value and of quality. Lou Barlow made a record for us that just came out, and in addition to the album, he didn't record a bunch of extra songs, but he made a documentary about the making of the record and made, I think, 5 videos for songs on the record. Mm-hmm. And they all have a homemade feel, but they all look really great and they're fun to watch. And so instead of, like, you know, throwing a bunch of extra songs out there as exclusives for people, we just kind of rolled out these videos, you know, 1 per week, and then this half-an-hour documentary, which is great to watch, and it just adds an extra element to the album itself rather than being a bunch of other stuff that didn't make it to the album. I mean, one thing I want to say is that as a label and as an artist, there's a demand not just for content from websites and blogs and your fans, but I know this is not a panel about retail, but, you know, there is this demand from especially chain stores to give them an exclusive track on top of the album in order for them to bring in the record and, you know, put it on sale or put it on a certain rack or something. And I have to say, this drives me crazy, and I think it drives the artist crazy as well. And a lot of them, at this point, have just said, we're just not going to do that, because they feel like, hey, we made a great record, and now you're telling me in order for you to stock it, you need another song as in addition to the great record. It's annoying, but you know, retail is desperate, and it's one of those things that is out there if you want to, you know, kind of play that game. But I think we're just a little bit done with it.
It's also really annoying to your fans.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't remember the artist, but there was an artist recently where, you know, there was like an extra track on a bunch of different retailers. So to get the extra stuff, I mean, and obviously it's all going to be on the internet anyway. So you're really not incentivizing somebody to go buy at all the different places. Right. But so we don't like to play that game.
It's so exciting that you can get it out right away, though. You know, like Erin can have an emotion and put it into a song, and her fans used to have to wait a year and a half to get, you know, that recording. Now she can put it out right away, you know. And like with Family of the Year, we release a song every month through their email list. We're going to start a subscription service in the spring for all these extra things people are talking about. So the content's there, and I think it's probably really exciting for you guys as artists to, you know, be able to get it out right away instead of waiting.
I'm actually doing it right now.
We're gonna open it up to questions here. There's a roaming microphone handler, and I'm gonna turn for questions here in a couple of minutes. So get them ready. I wanted to ask Yancey and Emily though about this quality control issue. So Yancey, I mean, do you have to love the music that you're going to work with, or the project, the creative project that you're going to work with?
No, I mean, we are invitation only, but it's not based on taste or aesthetics. It's entirely based on, are you sincere? Are you serious? Is it a creative project? And I just try to talk to everyone that comes through. I actually wanted to back up to something really quick,
sure,
which is that I am not heartbroken in the least that only 600 records sold more than 50,000 copies, because I think it drops the whole scale of things down, and that a 5,000 you know, a record that sells 5,000 copies can have a much bigger cultural impact than it did before.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the kinds of records that I care about. And,
yeah.
And I think it's probably true of most of us on the stage.
You look at the record sales of artists like, you know, I mentioned Dan Deacon earlier, or Girl Talk. I mean, their record sales have got to be under 10,000, I would bet, and yet they're selling out 4,000 seat, you know, auditoriums now, you know.
Well, you use the word successful, and I think it's just a matter of what qualifies as successful for what you're doing, and and I feel like we exist in a niche, and it can be a big niche, but I don't think anyone here has put themselves in a position where something has to be a platinum selling record for it to be considered a success.
Right, absolutely.
I also wholly agree just with Mac on the absurdity of you have to have your exclusive track for iTunes and your exclusive track for Rhapsody and for eMusic and all these places. I think it's a strange burden to put on an artist. And, you know, just with Kickstarter, you don't have to do anything like that. You can bake cookies and make a record that way. You know, you create your own economy however you want.
I think the essential relationship there, again, is the one between the artist and the fan, and I think the fan feels like there's some corporation standing between me and that artist who's trying to rip me off, and it never comes off as a good thing. I remember when the Smashing Pumpkins tried this in 2007 when they made that comeback record, and they did 5 versions of that record with one exclusive track for Target, for Best Buy, for Walmart, and it just totally backfired on them. It just looked, okay, so I got to buy this album 5 times if I'm a hardcore fan. You know, it doesn't play well. Bertis, did you want to jump in?
No, or go to the internet if you're a hardcore fan and download it.
Yeah, well, exactly. They're like driving people there.
Get the record wherever you want. Yeah.
Emily, what about quality control? I mean, it's obviously a thing of, you know, of love the music before you sign the band. But at the same time, is it a case of, you know, there's only so much love I've got at a certain point, you know, I can't possibly give back what I want. So how do you weigh that in your own life?
Absolutely. I mean, I have to be inspired by my artists. That's why I started a company. I didn't want bosses anymore telling me what to do. But other than that, you know, I think we do look for artists that are multifaceted. We also manage Margaret Cho, who's obviously a world-class comedian, but she has an album coming out that she's writing with Jill Sobule and the Decemberists and all these other people. You know, she's an actress, she's an author. You know, and I think that can be really appealing to create different revenue streams. So, you know, that's what we look for, but obviously we're passionate about our artists, but I also don't want to care more than the musician does. I don't want to be bugging you guys 3 times about press requests and stuff like that, because, you know, otherwise what's the point? And you do need to build it up yourself before somebody like us will notice, because, you know, we're not miracle workers. So, you know, we do need the artist's help and passion as well.
I think one thing, you know, to follow up on what Yancey was saying, just the whole notion of signing a band or an artist now just because I can market this. I can figure out a way to sell gazillion copies of this thing. It doesn't matter how good it is. And I think those days are quickly fading, because the fans, you know, can smell the bullshit now, you know, and they can decide. They have a much larger stake in figuring out what's going to succeed than they could have 10 years ago, because the pipeline was so narrow as to what kind of music was being exposed. I want to open it up to questions. Anybody? Does anybody just raise your hand? We've got a roaming microphone. Anybody have a question? Got one up here, or whatever. Take that one.
How does Kickstarter make money?
If a project is successfully funded, we take 5% of what was raised. That's our only fee.
Keep your hands up. Right here.
How you doing? My name is Brian McTeer. I have a new nonprofit organization called Weathervane Music, and I'm a huge fan of R.E.M., favorite band ever. I learned everything I know about DIY just even being a 12-year-old kid in 1984. It was part of the dialogue, even with the fans back then. And then I had my second education about DIY music in the 90s in college with, you know, the Chapel Hill record scene. I kind of want to know, this DIY conversation sort of assumes that, is there no longer need for outside investment in new artists?
Well, you said something about R.E.M, so I'll answer that. I think that's a real, I've been wanting to say something for the last hour. That world's changing like crazy. And Kickstarter is part of it. What you're doing, Erin, is part of it. But if people don't think they're going to be able to make their money back, they're not going to invest in it. And capital formation, I mean, I'm not an economist, but the basics of how people get funded is clearly changing a lot. And labels, whatever their size, whether they're really tiny or mid-sized like Max or a major label like Warner's, have for years been that funding source for a lot of people. If you're lucky enough to get a record deal, it means somebody's willing to pay to get you in a studio, get off the road for a while to be able to make a record. That's been the way artists have done what they do. And you know, I know the headline news is, oh, people don't need labels anymore and all that kind of stuff. That's assuming they want to do all that work themselves, and I don't think they generally do. It's lucky that you've got the sense of graphic design, so does the singer in our band. He's always loved designing the album covers. It's certainly part of his expressive creativity and all that. But not every band wants to be doing full-time. There's a division of labor issue. And the beautiful thing about a label, when it works well, whether it's a label with 6 people at it or whether it's a label with 600 people at it, although there's not that many of those, is that they do that dirty work. They do that marketing. They get that word out there. It's a team of people, an army of people around the world helping people know you have a new record, because it's a busy world. You know, people miss the fact that there's a new record out there. They can't buy it or they can't even know about it. So I can't remember what the question was, but that's the answer.
It was about funding, and you have you have to look for alternative revenue streams. You know, I have a solo artist named Sydney Wazer, and you know, there aren't 6 of her to do something like this. So we just signed her to Ford for lifestyle modeling. Or I was at the airport last night. This vitamin water is called Sync, download of vitamins and antioxidants. But it looks like MySpace is giving away music with this. You know, that's another way to get it out there. So, you know, there's obviously private investors and there's other ways, because like you do need money up front. Kickstarter is a great way to do that. But you do need a partner. And the scary thing about labels is, like, even if you find a great team and a great partner that believes in you, they might not be there in 6 months. So it's really important for artists to retain their rights, because even if you license an album to a label, you know, maybe in 10, 20 years when you don't feel like touring, you'll still own that. You can still put that out. It's kind of like a retirement plan for yourself.
Brian, there's a panel tomorrow that Brian Message is on. Brian Message is one of the managers of Radiohead. Started a new thing called Polyphonic. It's a network and Mama and Courtyard. And it's essentially a funding mechanism. And it's going to try to match up sort of venture capital money with artists that want to go to a different level in their career, but they have certain financial needs. So there's that model. There's all that kind of stuff out there. It's just, they always say in this business, every conference I've ever been to, there's never a formula. Well, there really used to be a formula, and that formula is now a heck of a lot more options.
Yeah, I mean, at this conference, you know, Peter Jenner, who's been through a few generations of music, you know, called it chaos in like 2007, and I think that's a pretty apt term for where we're in. But chaos is not necessarily a bad thing. But it does mean that artists, it's no longer just about handing your record in and going on tour. You know, there's a whole complex web of relationships now that are being created, and very, very exciting time, but not an easy time either. Any more questions, Race?
Hi, thanks. Really good panel, Emily. A few themes I think have developed. I think a lot of times people have a hard time asking for money because you feel like you're sort of, you know, panhandling. And Erin said, you know, the idea of doing something yourself, it's really artistic. I think that the idea of being yourself and maintaining your integrity is really important. And I think also the idea of, you know, the music industry approach of sort of punishing the fans by suing the fans is so ridiculous that when you have that passion there, you want to try to figure out ways to incentivize your fans. And if they have passion and they're sharing your music, that's a positive thing. And I think that as we all try to figure out what themes are emerging, I think, you know, being great is obviously important, loving what you do, being yourself, but don't punish the fans. And I think there's got to be some truism that the future of the music business is not going to be about sticking people or whacking them with a stick, but more like giving them carrots and incentivizing them. I just want to see if you guys, if you have ideas about how that may play out in the future.
Well, Erin and I were talking about this backstage before we came out. If I'm allowed to talk about.
Go for it.
But it's really hard to talk about money. I mean, just on a basic level, but even on an artistic level, it's even harder, and it just feels icky. And it's the reason why there was Albert Grossman, and there's a reason why there's that whole side of the business. And you want to be able to remove yourself from that, and you want to be able to pretend that you don't need that to do it, that you make music over here, and there's a bank account over here, and they're completely unrelated. But obviously, it's not really that way. And what we liked about Kickstarter was that it was sort of a lubricant for this sort of thing. You could talk about it without talking about it. It's obvious what your goal is, but you don't have to say exactly what you need. And the directness is very important because it's the same reason you give to the Red Cross after a tsunami, because you want your money to go to that kid you saw in the news. You don't want to buy a chalkboard in Wisconsin, you know, and you want to know directly where your stuff is going. So I think all that stuff really comes into play.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is that Well, I think this big question of where does the money come from if it's not coming from a label, right, you know, in the old model, has a really direct creative impact. And I think that's why something like Kickstarter is really important. But I also think I also wanted to jump in on the last question too and say that I think labels also offer, like what Mac was saying, a lot of really interesting things. I just think for me it was like, where in the process does the label come in? Which was, you know, I have a manager that I've had for the last 8 years. We have an amazing relationship and a long-term business relationship. And we are not a record label. There's a lot of things we do, but we're not a record label. And so for me to fund my record, get it to a point, and then we were looking for a partner. And again, like what Emily was saying, like somebody that we felt was gonna be there for a long time, that had integrity, whose creative and business goals were the same as ours. So that's why we, you know, decided at this point to partner with a company like Righteous Babe, which is a label that does what labels do. And we're happy to have that support and that staff, and they came in for us at the right time after the creative decisions were made. I mean, everyone has their stories about, you know, when you take someone's money in the old model, you had to do what they said. So here it is in Kickstarter, you have a different model of people are giving you money for different reasons. And, you know, I had my own, like, stories about the record label after the advance telling me what they wanted my record to sound like, rejecting my record, asking me to write more songs. You know, all that has a creative impact. So I feel really excited about how much more freedom I have to make the music I want to make and find the people who want to work with me based on that music.
We never gave anyone a big enough advance to demand that they make any certain type of record. So.
Bertis, I got to put you on the spot. What did you think about, you know, it was brought up about the lawsuits, suing the fans for downloading music. What did you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think that it's, I think it was a tactic. We're in Washington, right? This is where politicians, like, talk on both sides. I think it was a tactic that ultimately the people that were doing it decided it was probably not a good idea to be suing their fans. You know, the heaviest users and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, I think there is clearly, I mean, what we've got right now is a disconnect between the way our copyright laws are written and the way we are all living. You know, every time you forward an email potentially, or you know, cut and paste something out of something on a paid site you want to send to a friend, didn't want to register. You know, there's all kinds of violations of copyright that, under the letter of the law, are technically illegal. But it's the way that, you know, I think somebody once told me that the internet is a file sharing service. That's what the internet's all about. That's what it does. So figuring out how you're going to monetize, and there are all these panels here, and there are a lot of very bright people in this conference right now trying to figure out a way of monetizing file sharing, some sort of collective licensing, some sort of central server, or the various pod models that are out there. That's, I think, going to be what the ultimate solution is going to be. But the suing the fans, I mean, the RIAA has backed off that and realized they've got to go. There are other approaches that make more sense and that are going to make more sense economically and certainly from a public relations standpoint.
Labels had such an amazing opportunity when Napster came out. I was in high school then, and I was getting all these B-sides and live things, and you know, even as a teenager, I was like, I would pay up to $30 a month, you know, for a subscription service like this, and suing people instead is just insane.
Well, it's fascinating. When I did this book, I interviewed over 300 people who were downloading music at around the time of Napster, and almost to a man or a woman. These were all like 18, 19-year-old college kids at the time. And they all said, definitely, I would pay for this. This is so easy. This is so convenient. I'm loving music. This is, you know, I'm getting all this great stuff. And, you know, the opportunity was missed back then. There's no doubt about it.
But in defense, I mean, now I'm going to feel really like the old school guy. But in defense of that, the pirates or the people who are on the internet posting stuff willy-nilly are not worrying about clearing anything. Labels have to, I mean, Rob Glazer has a great quote that the music industry was designed by Rube Goldberg with Kafka as his architect. Or I think I may have, you know, because all these tripwires and there's all these, you know, you got to get, there's 3 producers, there's 4 songwriters, there's 3 different publishing companies, there's an artist signed to 2 different labels, and for that one song, for a little tiny micro payment that somebody might pay someday, you got to go clear it with all these different parties, each of which can say no. So that is one reason everybody always savages the record labels for having missed this opportunity, but to do it legit, it takes a lot of work and time. And that's why, that's one of the reasons that explains the missed opportunity. There are others as well.
So hang on to your rights, and then, you know, when I get a sync, I'm like, okay, cleared. you know?
That's the fundamental disconnect, is that there's these legal entanglements on the one side where they're trying to extricate it, and as you said, they've got to pay so many people, so 3 of them might agree, but 1 doesn't, and suddenly you can make that file for free. And on the other side, we're looking at a room full of Jamie Thomases here. You know, let's face it, if it had been us, we'd all be on trial, you know? One more question, we got another minute, right over here in the front.
For the store's delivery, we released our own product for the DIY model, and I can tell you that as a business, we are struggling. And what I learned is that while you'll find a few select artists who can do this DIY model, they really need somebody, and maybe what we need is a new definition of what the label is. And so that's what I'd like to hear you talk, and education for a new workforce and with a new kind of skill set, how to shoot video in a new kind of way for the web.
That's like a whole panel.
This is distribution. This is what I was saying. There's a song you can download from this. You get the worldwide distribution through the internet, but there's plenty of cool ways to get your music out there other ways. I mean, it's just looking for the right partner.
This is a whole other panel too, but that is like the least appealing way for me to think about music.
Sorry.
That I can think of. I just want to say that. I know it is available, but it's also, that's why I feel like a record label is old-fashioned, but to me, it's still what's appealing about my connection to music and how I think about music. And when people say like, oh, but Radiohead didn't need a label, it's like, well, but that's because they're Radiohead. It's a little bit like that's because he's Trent Reznor. A band just starting out is not, they can't just say like, hey, pay what you want for our record, because people will. They'll just not.
Right, but we're music geeks too, and so what I'm looking for by doing something like this, I've been talking to a wine company about doing a custom Family of the Year wine bottle. I want to get it out to potential music fans that aren't sitting on Pitchfork, because everybody listens to music. You just need to figure out a way to get to them.
Okay, unfortunately, we have to quit because there's another panel, but I want to thank the panelists here. Hopefully we've helped. Thank you.